Well, before that, I was like, I was a young banker in Moscow, and I saw the bank that I was working at actually create money out of thin air and make a loan for an acquisition that we were doing. And so, as this young banker, I went to the treasurer and I was like, so like a Russian subsidiary doesn't have this much money to make the loan to, what ended up being, politically connected people. And I was genuinely curious. I was like, where does this money come from? Like, does it come from London? Does it flow through the Russian central bank? Does it, I asked all these questions, and finally the treasurer pulled me aside and he was like, look kid, like we make the loan, I open the deposit account and I enter it into like both sides of the ledger. And I was like, I was just blown away. I was like, you're kidding. Like, I have a master's degree and like studied finance and economics for most of my life. And it was totally shocking. And so that was a young banker. That was before essentially like Satoshi created like what we know as the crypto system today. And so when I was first exposed to Bitcoin, my first thought, like a lot of traditional bankers, was it sounds a bit like a scam. And then I stopped and I thought to myself, actually, wait, no, fiat is a scam. I mean, I know fiat is a scam, and I've been like looking for kind of like, I've always been reflecting on what is money. And so, when I read the white paper for Bitcoin back in like, I don't know, not long after it was like published, I was like, gosh, this is incredible. Like, this is really genuinely the most honest form of money you could ever create, because it can't be manipulated. It can't be printed by some centralized authority and just given to insiders. Jessica, I think the thing that's most shocking for people, that people really will find it really hard to believe, is that banks can create money. They can simply create money by making loans. And so what I saw as a young banker is not at all what you learn at school in terms of like, what is money, like how does the banking system work? And the way it really does work is that banks can create money based on their own credit, based on the idea of future repayment of those loans, and then they can make those loans to whomever they want. And so what I saw when I did emerging markets investment banking was really shocking. The loans made to like, highly influential people connected to the government, etc., basically financed by these investment banks themselves to get fees from a lot of these clients. So it's a really fascinating question, because I think as human beings, I think we naturally want to cooperate. And I think that if you don't think very deeply about it, you think, there's a way for these systems to work well together. Like, if you think of like fintechs, for example, fintechs are basically, they're built on the old technology stack, which is fractional reserve banking, and they've added a few things that make it more acceptable. They've added better UI, better UX, or whatever, and you think, well, they cooperate quite well together. But for me, the traditional system built on fractional reserve banking, and the crypto system, which is built on the principle of no double spend and is open and transparent and accessible. For me, these are two ideologically opposed systems, and they'll never work together. I mean, there may be ways that like the old legacy system can kind of distribute crypto products, etc., but they're fundamentally opposed. I mean, crypto is an existential threat to something that, in my view, is simply built on lies. Like the fractional reserve system is actually built on the idea that you put your money with the bank and you think it's your money, but legally it belongs to the bank. If you look at it, I mean, that's just one of the most outrageous lies, that like you think it's your money there, but it's not actually your money, and you think it's there for you to have it back whenever you want. But actually, legally, the bank can do whatever they want with it. It's completely fungible, which basically translates into it's a shell game. So you left your money here. Somebody else wants their money back. Well, we give your money to somebody else to pay them back. And if you look at the fractional reserve system, I think people think that like their money is like, when they deposit it with the bank, like their salary, I think they think it's like an Ocean's 11 type of thing, that somebody with white glove kind of takes it and puts it into like, a stainless steel vault and closes the door, and that's where their money is. But that's not at all the case. Like, only a sliver of that at the bottom of the inverted house of cards, which is essentially the fractional reserve system, is kept on hand, and the rest of it is loaned out. So I think, if you look at the crypto system, crypto is exactly opposite. It's like, you control it, not a centralized entity controls it. You know exactly where it is, you know what's happening with it, you can actually say whether you want it to happen or not. I mean, like, and the end result for many people, normal people who don't care so much about like the basis of fractional reserve or blockchain or whatever, for them it's like the output, it's the benefits. And we see the benefits very clearly in DeFi. When you cut out the bank, there's actually interest there. People actually can make money from it. And in the traditional system, which is based on this double spend system controlled by centralized entity, there's just no interest left. So I don't think you're going to see these two systems cooperate long term. I think there will be one winner between these two systems. I think crypto is really an existential threat to the banking system. And yeah, I think you will see a lot of dirty tricks come up in the future. I think to protect, we're talking about money. It's not something marginal. We're talking about livelihoods. We're talking about things that underpin, so much of how society is built on. I think that you will see the traditional banking system react to crypto as a challenger by doing everything they can to prevent that system from winning. I think it's often like a secret that's hidden in plain sight. And I think most people, like, we live by heuristics, right? Rules of thumb. So we don't like stop and think of all the different things in life. We just take it for granted. And one of them, of course, is money. And so money is an exchange of value, essentially, for like, creating a good or providing a service or something like that. And like, people don't stop and think like, where does money really come from, and what's the value of money, and who controls it? So one of the most shocking things is that banks create most of the money that exists in our economy, not central banks. And then those banks, which have this almost like godlike power to create money, to create value, can then do whatever they want with it. There couldn't be anything that's more opposite than kind of our open, free, democratic idea of how we think our society is actually based. Well, it's pretty, like I said, like it's an incredible power to actually be able to create money, right? Because that drives so much of human behavior. So essentially for these like small number of centralized entities that like sit at like, the intersection of almost everything throughout our economy, they really influence like the flow of our lives, the flow of how we structure, like how we're building our society. So for these banks essentially to be able to like create money and then loan money, give money essentially to those who are like the most connected is like, for me, it's like an incredible problem in society. It's one of the main things that drove me to investigate crypto. Well, again, Jessica, it comes to like, it's such a prevalent thing like money and how it exists in our economy and the banking system. Most people don't stop and think, how does this actually work? And I wouldn't have stopped and thought that, except that like my first job after business school was doing emerging markets investment banking, and so I ended up in Russia and China and places like that where essentially how the economic machine works was very raw. And so I saw it like really firsthand, like how money moves, how payment systems work. But if you sit in like, London or New York or Tokyo, as a banker, you just don't stop and think about it. You're just part of some vast machine, and money for you is something that's created by the government, but actually really also created by the commercial banks, and the price is set by a small cabal of like central bankers and their advisors, and the whole banking system is, enabled by like, many of the institutions that are set up to kind of like, protect consumers, but also to protect insiders. And so most people, when they look at crypto, they just think it's a scam. And they think it's a scam because it doesn't fit with their belief system. And Jessica, money is a belief system. It's like a religion. Like, we think money has value because we think that other people believe it has value. And so it's a very emotional thing. Like, if you poke people in their belief systems, they get very upset, right? So, like, to kind of challenge, like, crypto for people who've actually, had their eyes opened about how the world really works is very upsetting, right? That's why you get like so-called Bitcoin maximalists react in such a in such a strong way, because they've really seen, they've taken the right pill. They've really seen the world for as it actually is. But for somebody who like is just coming into that space and say, oh, it's a scam or whatever, Bitcoiners get all upset, and then so do people who support other, like, support Ethereum and whatever. But core bankers don't look at it that much because they think they think that their system is kind of the only system, and they haven't stopped and thought deeply about it. The scariest are those bankers who've actually stopped, people who watch Real Vision, people who follow Raoul Pal, and people who've, like, been exposed to the space, who've kind of had their eyes opened, but then they're sitting in a traditional bank, I think are really terrified. Because I think they actually, if you take that pill, but you're like, but you're not in the right system, like, it's very scary, right? It's like somebody who's on the Titanic, and, like, you're like, okay, there's an iceberg right there. They're like, oh my God, we need to, like, change course. But, like, if you're on the Titanic, you can't just simply, like, turn the wheel and, like, avoid, like, what's coming. So I think many bankers who have actually had their eyes opened, that they really see this as, like, they're on the Titanic and they're heading towards an iceberg, and they need to think of a plan B. So. It's really interesting because we do live in a democracy, so you actually would start thinking that, like, politicians will think, well, we've got to do what's for the greater good of society and for the voters at the end of the day. And, there's a really fascinating chart that you can look at in the United States, which is, like, the percentage of the economy essentially taken up by the financial system. So after the Second World War, that started off as, like, mid-single digits of what the financial system did. And this is the old-fashioned Boy Scout idea that the financial system just simply challenges or channels excess savings into productive opportunities. But, like, that has grown substantially from the time of the end of the Second World War to today, where it takes up almost 20% of the system. That's almost like a vampire. It lives off the system. And so there's many people who enable that. But what you might hope is that one day politicians will think, well, actually, this is much better for end users and our voters, that they have the benefits to, what the economy is generating, rather than that being channeled to the banking system. And that's through, like, incredibly high salaries, that's through dividends to shareholders, etc. So all of those things are available as an option today in the crypto system. So, I think there are enablers on the banking side of things. Like, for sure, you're going to see regulators, you're going to see special interest groups, you're going to see the banks themselves defend that position, incredibly strongly. But, we do already see some countries where politicians are forward-looking and think, well, it could be more of a benefit for our population if, like, there is these other alternatives, so. Well, it's education, I think. I think the biggest thing is education. Like, one of the greatest antidotes to, like, problems in this world is educating yourself. And if you keep sleepwalking, thinking that, like, banks are on your side, banks are good for you, money has to be created and controlled by the government should set the price of interest, like, the price of money throughout our economy, like, the greatest thing is once you start educating yourself about some of these very basic ideas, it opens up fascinating avenues because it touches on philosophy, it touches on, like, the numbers behind it, it touches on the benefits for you. Like, imagine what you would do with all the interest that your money should be earning for you that's actually going to the banking system, right? So I think the best thing to do is to educate yourself, and there's an amazing ways to do that, right? Educational videos, and I'm very in favor of the crypto system because it aligns with my values, which are, democratic, egalitarian, that, the playing field, the financial playing field is really tilted somehow against us. And, like, I think many people have that kind of, like, that, that feeling, that suspicion that there's something not quite fair out there. And the more that you educate yourself, the more you are aware that there is something there is something rotten out there. And the solution really is control, Jessica. The solution is to take control yourself. And only the crypto system essentially allows you to have that control of your own destiny, of your own future, rather than trusting it to the banking system.